The fourth annual Top 100 Names to Know, returning to Michigan high school hockey, will officially be unveiled tomorrow, Wednesday, November 13th. Tons of great content coming your way as I highlight a bunch of key returners from across the state to get you ready for the regular season. Opening week is underway. We are in the midst of week one already, with one game last night, and I believe two more games on the slate at the time of taping right now at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. So a ton of action coming our way as the week unfolds as well. But I wanted to take this time before things really got underway to talk a little high school hockey, talk about the upcoming season, teams to watch, players, maybe some playoff format talk, just the state of high school hockey as a whole. A lot of directions that this episode may go. My guest on tonight's episode, my first guest ever on the PD's Picks podcast. He's a well-known figure in Michigan sports media as a co-host on the Metro Detroit Airways with WDFN and WJR for nearly 2 decades. His columns have been published in magazines and major media websites during that time as well. He was responsible for the Millen Man March back in 2005, a recipient of the Best Radio Sports Talk Show host in 2007 by the Detroit Metro Times, the one-time play-by-play voice of Wayne State football, and former color commentator for the Plymouth Whalers and the USNTDP. He's the current host of Off the Air, the current host of What the Puck, and the current co-host of Shep and Sean. He's the current co-host of Hockey Time on State Champs Network alongside John Kidd. I'm missing a boatload of accolades and honors and accomplishments in his decorated career, but I'm sure all of you watching on YouTube already know who it is by now. Most importantly, to me, he's been a fantastic mentor and a friend for almost 10 years now. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Baligian. Welcome to the show.
You embarrass me, man. Come on. Long time viewer, Petey, first time guest. How are you, buddy?
Good. I had to do it to you. I had to do the intro justice, but I think it's important too, though, because I think sometimes we have it so good we can take it for granted, right? And you've been around and been involved for so long that I think the people who are closest to you or have been involved with you and around the game for so long, they might take for granted how decorated of a career you've had and how fortunate we are to have people like you that are advocates for our sport. So I did that on purpose, maybe a little embarrassing, but it had to be done because I do think it's important for people to know that we are really fortunate to have people like you involved in our game today. So
no, Petey, honestly, thank you. And it's kind of funny, doing this for 29 years now, it really is. There are some moments that you sit back and go, did I do that? You almost question your own reality, it's doing some play-by-play as well in the OHL and getting a chance to call Michigan State games. And, I'll say until the day I die to be able to call games in the National Hockey League, put that on my gravestone. That's it. I called games for the Carolina Hurricanes, so it really is, it's pretty cool. But, the one thing that I know you and I have in common is a love for this game. And I'm going to talk up this game at this level for the rest of my days. I think it's a great community. I think it's a special place. It's only getting better every single year, man. So, I appreciate the kind words, but it's not lost on me. I've been blessed beyond all belief,
Sure. And I mean, truth be told, we talk about the game getting better every year, more talented, more deep teams around the state that pop up and become blue bloods in the sport. I look at the media coverage and things that have happened with our game and how it gets covered now. And some of the people involved in our Tim Eric, Mike Caples, those are some of the best photographers in the country, and they're shooting high school games. I saw on Twitter this week, Matt Geitka, I don't know if you're familiar with him, was doing play-by-play for East Grand Rapids for a couple games throughout the season. He mentioned he was going to be doing a couple more games. That guy is a grade A play-by-play announcer, right? Bill Kahn, some of these local beat writers, I just think we can take it for granted because it's so good and guys have been here for so long. All those guys, and I'm missing a bunch, right? Like you know too. There's so many great media personalities, people who are passionate about our sport, who promote this game in various ways. So yeah, the state of the game gets better and better, but so does the state of like media coverage, if that's what you want to call it. Just promotion of the game gets better too, and is an important piece. So
Everybody brings something different to the table. I mean, Jimmy Young in the UP. I mean, he's been a UP legend forever. And I know you don't want to hear it. And as God is my witness, I'm not trying to embarrass you. What you do is unique. And everybody has to check out what you say, whether they agree with it or not, is inconsequential. And Petey, I'm here to narc on a bunch of people. I can't tell you how many times somebody came up to me and, did you see Petey's top 100? Did you see Petey's top 10? And it's like, do you understand what he's doing, right? Yeah. People are talking about it. That's, there's a lot to talk about in regards to this. Agree, disagree. And I think that's the coolest thing about this level is, I think once you're in, there's a mutual respect amongst everybody, that I'm so glad that you mentioned so many of the guys. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my buddy, Johnny Kidd. I mean, John's passion for this game and the amount he runs around and everything, it's fantastic. So it's a pretty cool place. And, I'm lucky to be a very, very small part of a much bigger thing.
We could spend all night talking about Brian Johnson's another name that jumps out to me, like absolute historian of the game and some 100%. Of the stuff he's brought to the table on social media. Casey Campbell, obviously, in the last couple of years too. Like we could go on and on, but so I'll give you a peek at my show sheet here. It introduce Sean, talk hockey. Like we could go a lot of different directions here tonight. I don't think this will be hard for us to come up with content and talk about the game. But I guess where I wanted to start first, and I'll go first just to kind of set the table for you, but like just the state of hockey, expectations for the season, kind of where you're at, what you're thinking as we get into the season here. And like I said, I'll give you my thoughts here first. And I just, throughout the fall, having seen some of the losses in terms of graduating classes and people on their way out last spring, who's coming back, I think I've talked to some coaches and people who say, it's going to be a down year for high school hockey. It's a down year. It's this, it's that. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think there's just a lot of unknowns as we sit here today. And, even putting together my top 100 for tomorrow, like, I don't know that the best player in high school hockey is going to be on that list. Like, full stop. Like, I think there's going to be some first-year guys, some first-year seniors, some AAA guys who have migrated over that are going to make some big and immediate impacts right out of the gate. And so I think that just leaves a lot of uncertainty, unknowns as we sit here at the start of the season that, I don't know that it's going to be a down year. I think it's going to be a very different year. I don't see a lot of standouts, a lot of big names returning like we've had with, Duffney in the past and Jackson Walsh and some of those iconic names who have been in the sport for 2 and 3 years that are now coming into a senior season and all eyes are on them. Cam Markham in the UP, like that type of thing. I just don't know that we have those names in our game right now, but I think there's going to be some big impactful first year guys that are going to make their mark. I'll put it that way. So.
No, I think that's a great way. I mean, I'll go back a year ago, Petey. I think if you were talking like player of the year competition, we pretty much knew a bunch of guys. We knew a bunch of guys' names were going to be on there. And I think if you could have said one of maybe 8, 9, 10 guys, you wouldn't have been wrong. But I think goaltender in particular, I mean, who had Garrett at Cranbrook, right? I mean, who had him on their list, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, and you and I were talking about this, off mic a little while ago. I think goaltender's another position. There are some guys that I've got an eye on. There's no doubt about it. But I think what happens with every new season is there's another guy that's going to pop his head up. And, I go back to last year, I had heard the murmurs of Garrett at Cranbrook, and I got a chance to see him play one time. And I was like, okay, this kid's good. Well, who knew he was going to put on the show that he put on? And it was a magnificent show. So I think that's the cool thing about it. There are certain places that are just going to bring new guys in, right? Somebody brought up Rogowski. We all knew how good he was.
Mhm.
I mean, we knew from the time he came on board his freshman year. But for him to take the step that he did last year, it was great to see. And so I think you're right. We're all guilty of doing that a little bit, as opposed to just saying, guys will manifest. They'll show themselves over the course of the season. I think in recent years, Petey, I give you a lot of credit for putting your list together so early. I'm going to tell you point blank, I cheat when we start to put together our top 10 list. It's like, we'll do it mid-December. Let some of the smoke clear and the dust settle, so to speak. So it's not easy to do at the beginning of the year. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, in not even just individual players too. I think there's going to be some programs. You had mentioned Calumet as we were kind of talking before. Granville is a team I haven't been shy about. I'm very high on them coming into the season. Both of those teams were sub 500 teams last season. I think there's more coming along the way too. And so that's kind of what I mean too, is like, there's not necessarily your iconic figures or players returning necessarily. There's still some very talented returners, don't get me wrong, and I'll spend a lot of time on that tomorrow. But in terms of teams too, teams that were really young last season and might not have had results in the wins and loss columns, but we're developing and we're learning and we're building and biding their time and now primed in a position to really make a run this season and beyond. So Granville is a team I've mentioned pretty high on. I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts too, just kind of what you're hearing or what you're seeing as far as maybe teams you think might surprise some people or not on our radar as we're sitting here week one that could emerge as the season unfolds.
Granville is one that comes to mind. And I mean, Joel is one of the great gentlemen of this game. He really is. I mean, just a class act all the way. I always like to ask people and send out a bunch of texts before the season and ask some coaches. And it was interesting because, in asking some of the West Side guys, that name came up. Sparta came up, and I don't know if that's fair to Sparta, to be honest with you, because I think everybody knows they burst on the scene last year and showed some flashes. Caledonia is another team that I've heard a few people say, hey, you might want to keep an eye on them. I'm fond of using the term the usual suspects, right? I love using that term. Whether we like to admit it or not, you look at Byron Center, they're a usual suspect now, period. Even if they didn't win the championship, they were a usual suspect. Mm-hmm. I think FHC is getting to that point as well. And I know both you and I have had a chance to see a couple of their guys the last couple of years. And the one guy, I remember standing there with you, not last summer, but the summer before, Gibby Grandel. If people aren't aware of him by now, quite frankly, shame on you. You should be. That's a kid that I think you watched him go like this and make that transition to a blue liner. And I think he's primed for a great season. It's great to hear that Milok's coming back as well. And of course, there have been 78 different Miloks. And, I was joking with McSween about that, but he's another one. He plays with that edge. He plays with the chip. You take it up to the line, but you want to make sure not to go over the line. So, I'm going to be intrigued. You can set your watch to it. Mike Slobodnik's going to have a good team, period, end of story. You know that he's going to have a good team. So, how much does BC lose? Well, you talk to Jordan and he's got some guys that he feels are ready to jump right in. And I think that's what the usual suspects do. Regardless of what they lose, Petey, they always seem to just, reinforce what was there. And it might take some time, but that's what they do.
It's funny. So you mentioned two teams that are kind of on my short list of up and comers, I'll say, right? We saw Bay City do it last year.
Yep.
And I think Zach Schock's doing a fantastic job in Bay City. I think that's a program who will continue to climb the state ranks and could reach that status, that echelon of being like the next Clarkston or Byron Center, to kind of climb the ranks and become one of those potential blue bloods down the line. Sparta, big matchup between Sparta and Bay City later on this week too.
Yeah.
And I joked, like, it's the Spider-Man meme. Like, Bay City is Sparta, Sparta is Bay City. Those are two teams that are both progressively climbing up the ladder the last couple seasons. And Sparta might be a rung or two behind Bay City in that climb, but with a big year could catapult up the rankings, right? So Sparta's one team I'm very intrigued about this season. You also mentioned Caledonia. That was one team I actually one of the, I don't know, half a dozen teams I didn't watch last season, didn't get eyes on them. But I did get a chance to see Harmon Esch in the MDHL this fall, and he was fantastic.
Yeah.
High motor guy, just didn't quit. Like, might not be the prettiest or, the dipsy doos, but he is going to grind his face off up and down the ice. And so I got familiar with him and his game this fall, and I start looking at their team and what they accomplished last season. And no slight to Esch, obviously, but he was third, fourth on that team in scoring.
Yep.
And all 3 or 4 of those guys were sophomores, juniors slated to come back. So if you're telling me you got Esch and you got 2 or 3 more guys like him, like, you're so spot on about Caledonia, and a very intriguing team.
It's Petey, and here's the thing. I mean, for anybody watching this, is God is my witness. I can vouch for Petey too. It's not just what we see. I think it's important to talk to some of the coaches, the guys that see these guys all the time. And I kid you not, the first 3 guys that I talked to from the West Side, the first thing they said is, look out for Caledonia this year. They're going to be really interesting. That's good for all of us. I don't care what anybody says. It's good for all of us that what FHC is going to bring to the table. I think the Bird Dogs are another team. You've seen them go up and down under Coach Bissett. You know what you're going to get. Joel, it seemed like Granville was at USA Hockey Arena years running. But I like when the Sparta bursts on the scene. I like when a Caledonia bursts on the scene. And Reith's Puffer making their run last year. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I like to see. And I say it all the time. I love the idea of Cinderella. And if I may, I think one of the things that kind of bugs me about the way things are going right now is I think there's too much effort to create a Cinderella. You don't create Cinderella. Cinderella just happens. And Cinderella goes on that run and knocks off a couple teams. And to me, that's the true definition of a Cinderella.
And I think that's why guys like you and me get as excited about a Bay City last season, a Sparta this year, Caledonia, because those are the real deal type Cinderella teams, right? That can compete and play hard and play scrappy, and might not have as much talent as some of your top teams, but they're well coached, disciplined, structured, can play up a notch, right? And compete with some of those higher level teams. I should have said this earlier in the podcast, Sean. I would consider myself probably more of a Lee Corso as you and I get together. And you may be a little bit more of a Kirk Herbstreit, straight down the middle. I can't make a pick in this game because I'm calling the game type stuff. So if we start getting into uncomfortable waters, I'll give you a safe word. You just say pineapple if you tell me, you know what, Petey, I don't want to get into picks. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I could be calling the game this weekend. So
this is what's fun about doing this. I don't have to worry about it. When I'm on state champs, I have to worry about. Now, listen, yeah. I'm a firm believer, especially one of the things that I love about doing this is, you're talking about young men. I know they don't want to hear it, but you're talking about young men. Man, if you feel the need to dog young men, you better go check yourself, because trust me, there were some times in doing the stuff that I've done before, and even guys that I liked, it's just like, dude, I got a job to do. If you suck, you suck, and things like that. You don't have to do it at this level. And I to be honest with you, it's very refreshing to me, Petey. It really is.
Good. So yeah, pineapple. If we ever get into any uncomfortable waters for you, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. I get
right,
it, so.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you're spot on too. Like at the end of the day, these are young men who, still developing, still growing, maturity and that whole thing. So it's something I try to be mindful of too, right? Like, try to focus on the positives, if especially as a former coach, right, or a current coach, even still, like, for every negative, you try to give 2 positives or whatever it may be, always trying to build towards something.
It's funny, Petey, because I think at the same time, you have to be honest because, and I'm not sitting here saying that I'm a talent evaluator or a scout or anything. I was very fortunate to spend a long time in the OHL and a few years in the USHL. And sometimes a guy jumps out to you, you see a guy and, at the same time, if somebody says, hey, man, this kid's a real deal. And if you don't think he's a real deal, you have to say it. You know, I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to bash the guy, but man, I think that this kid could go play in the OHL next year. Pull a Rogowski and go play in the OHL next year. It doesn't mean that you have to roll your eyes or go, "Are you kidding me?" or anything. But I think there's a right way to say, nah, you know what? It might be in his best interest to maybe get another year at this level and, maybe go to the null and see how that works. And if he's ready to take that next step and see what happens after that, because I think it's important to shoot straight, especially when you're talking about kids. Because the last thing in the world I would want to do personally is blow smoke up some kid's behind. You know what I mean? And you've got all the tools, young man. You're gonna make it. I'm not going to say crap like that. And who the heck am I anyway? I'm just some dumb media member,
Yeah. So there's some banter going on in the chat here regarding Howell, Heartland, Brighton. We can get into Livingston County a little bit. We talked about some of those up and coming teams and potential Cinderellas, or I wouldn't say Howell coming out of nowhere, right? They're a very reputable brand, if you will, in Michigan high school hockey. But the stars are aligning a little bit, I think, in Howell this year, and things are looking up in a big way for little brother. Sorry, but I'll be the one to say it, but I think they own that too a little bit in Howell, because Brighton and Heartland tend to get a lot of the love and attention. But I think this could be an interesting year for Howell, considering their returners, considering some of the newcomers we know coming in. Henry Lansky being a big one in net for them. Interesting season on the horizon, I think, for Howell.
I agree. And, the one thing former coach Rocky Johnson told me, and our mutual friend as well, Keith Robertson, told me, they told me last year, hey, you know what? We got a lot right now. We know what's going on in our backyard, and there are some young players that might not be ready to blossom, this particular season, but the pipeline, there's a lot coming. And I think the world of Keith. I'm not trying to embarrass him. I think he's a great guy. I know how much he's helped Dave in the past and how much he helped Rocky. I'm not going to sit here and say there's a changing of the guard. I'm not ready to do that yet. I'll tell you my pecking order. I start with Heartland. If I'm talking about Livingston County, I'm starting with Heartland. I think with both Brighton and Howell, there's a lot of unknowns, and the unknowns have to show themselves this year. And the one thing that I know is, we were talking about Keith. I'll say the thing about Kurt Kavisto, and Lord knows he doesn't need me to say it. Kurt Kavisto will find a way to develop these guys. And this almost reminds me of when that group were a bunch of sophomores. And I used to make the joke all the time on the show, Levi and Petey and Duff. Hey, those sophomores are not going to be sophomores for long. And I can't believe we blew by. And I think you feel the same way. I'm not sure we've ever talked about it. Watkins is one of the best you'll find at this level, period, end of story. I think that he's only going to be better his senior year, and he's going to grow into that leadership role. There's a lot of young talent, including a kid that played on that top line last year as a freshman. And Kurt brings in more talent as well. It's young, it's inexperienced, but I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, Petey. There's a big difference between being a young player in November and being a young player in February, especially when you're playing that tough schedule. And Brighton, year in, year out, has a tendency to play one of the toughest schedules. So Brighton and Howell, there's a little bit more of the unknown, and let's see how some of this youth develops. But I think Heartland's loaded. Gad was probably going to get ticked at me for saying that, but I think they're loaded. Petey, there's one guy in this state, and I've said this on State Champs, and I have no problem saying it to you. There's one guy in this state that I would tell kids, watch that kid play. That's how you should play the game, and it's Ian Costomo, and I have no problem saying that. I love Ian Costomo. That's a kid that plays 200 feet. He's played 200 feet since day one. I think every kid should watch Ian Costomo and aspire to play like Ian Costomo. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And he's another one. He's a senior now. I mean, we've watched this kid grow up in front of our very eyes. So it's going to be very, very, it's going to be very, very cool to see how that transitions.
Yeah, talking about, we were talking about returners and some of those kind of iconic standout names in our sport. You know, I don't know that there's any bigger than Castamo right now, right? Like he's a guy who you can't watch Heartland and not notice him. And it maybe it's cliche, but he makes people around him better.
Yep.
I mentioned on a previous podcast, I think you could stick my 35-year-old ass on a line with him and he'd make me an all-stater. Like he's just that good, right? He's good enough to create and find space on his own, but he's also smart enough to find his teammates in open ice too and get them the puck and opportunities to make plays. And that's not something you can't coach that, right?
Yep.
You just have a great hockey IQ and understanding of the game. And he's surrounded by great talent. Don't get me wrong. Like he's got good wingers on both sides and throughout that lineup. But when you have a guy like that who can help put teammates in positions where they can succeed too, that just does not happen very often, especially at our level. So
And I always laugh because as well as I do, there are always people that are going to look at the scoring sheet and they're going to look at statistical leaders and stuff like that.
mhm.
And I mean, no disrespect, but I'm going to say it anyway. How you can tell me you don't know a darn thing about hockey is when you look at things like that. Because I'll tell you what, Ian Cosimo's not going to be on any scoring leaders list. It's not going to happen. I would take him over just about anybody in the state. And I felt that way last year. I mean that. I would take him over just about anybody in the state. What he brings to the table, his 200-foot game, Petey, you can't put a price tag on that.
For sure. Let me change gears up here a little bit for you, and it's an important topic I want to get to just because of the high school hockey landscape and knowing the audience we're working with here with high school hockey. The misconception of one of the biggest misconceptions about high school hockey is the season itself. It's 25 games. It's not a lot of games. I want to play more games. If I play a AAA or a travel schedule, I'll get 50, 60 games. Or even more, right? Like November through March, yes, it's a limited schedule, right? Like you're going to get 25 games. You're going to get a shit ton of practices, though, too.
Yep.
That's something I think high school hockey has going for it. It's a ton of on ice time, not necessarily games, but opportunities to really improve your game and get better. But the component that gets lost in a lot of this messaging is off-season stuff, out of season hockey. It's your team Michigan in the spring, which as many people know about that, there's still a huge contingent that don't.
Amen.
I was talking with literally, I believe this kid was one of the best goalies in the state last year. I'm sitting with him at the MIHL showcase last year, and I said, "Hey, are you going to try out for Team Michigan?" And he said, "What's Team Michigan?"
Oh.
That's a problem, right? So I really wanted to spend some time just talking about, I'll call it off-season hockey, spring, summer, fall hockey when it comes to the high school landscape, because it's just as big, if not bigger, of a component than the actual winter season itself. Team Michigan, I think, is really good. It's a fantastic product with fielding essentially an all-star team of juniors and an all-star team of seniors that go out to Minnesota for a showcase in April in front of a lot of junior scouts and college scouts. It's not the 20 best players in each grade. I think people involved would admit that. They're not looking for the 20 best players. No team ever constructed, unless you're Team Canada for the Olympics, are you ever looking for the 20 best players, right? You're looking for 3 or 4 goal scorers, 3 or 4 grinders, 2 or 3 defensemen on the back end that can be sound defensively and kill penalties, right? You're not looking for the 6 best offensive-minded defensemen. You're looking to build a team. So there's a ton of talent that gets cut and doesn't make it at Team Michigan, right? But it's a fantastic process that for anyone in high school hockey who says, "Oh, I'm one of the best players and I'm all state, I'm this, I'm that," if you really want to consider yourself to be one of the best in high school hockey, it starts with Team Michigan tryouts. The showcase, the tryouts itself is now scouted, right? That's a huge opportunity. And then you go through summer and fall hockey and you get into your MDHLs, your MHAs. There's some pretty competitive split season teams, but that's not really my area of focus, I'd say. The UP does a lot going west to Minnesota for the NAPHL. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for the people up there. But just I wanted to get into off-season hockey a little bit because it's so important when it comes to the high school hockey game.
It's interesting the Team Michigan thing, and it was in Novi this past year, Petey, as you know, and it was cool. But it's number one, it's 2 miles away from my house, so it's all about me. It was easy for me. I had a bunch of the guys come over. We had some barbecues over here. It was great to see Micah coming from the UP, and I was very glad to have him. Boy, you want to talk about another great guy. I'm sure you'll agree. Micah's just good people, man. The one thing that I will say, and I've said this many times when I did the thing in conjunction with the Michigan High School Coaches Association, we all talk about how much this game has grown, and it has, and it's not just words. And I've heard you say it. I've heard many other people say it. I am doing everything I can to bang the drum, to use a term from one of my favorite movies, Braveheart, to bring the clans together. I think we're at a point right now where it would be in the best interest of everybody to do our best to bring the best together come fall. And I know we can't do 100%. I know some of the guys might be playing football. I know there may be some guys from up north. There may be guys from Traverse City. There might be guys from the west side that can't make it. But Petey, I'm banging this drum. I'm going to continue to bang it. I want to see us do our very best to bring as many 90% of the best players together under an umbrella with the people that are truly sincere about the game at this level, that are invested about the game at this level. The hockey in high school, it's growth and development. And I think that can happen. And I've told anybody that'll listen, that's what I'm for. And I'm not disrespecting anything else. I'm not. And I know some people are going to say that, and I don't give two craps. It doesn't make any sense to follow this model that we follow now. It doesn't make any sense. I think it can be better. And I wish that everybody could get in a room. Listen, come over to my house. I'll have a barbecue for y'all. Okay. Yell at each other, scream at you. At least you'll get a free meal out of it. And let's try to figure out the best way to develop these guys and showcase what Michigan has to offer. And I think it's possible, and I'm all for it. I'm 100% for it.
Well, I'll use the Spider-Man meme reference again. This maybe more in a negative way, but like it's pointing fingers, right? And a lot of anger directed towards others for doing the exact same things. If that makes sense, right? And there's in great intentions across the board. There's so many good intentioned people involved in your spring, summer, fall hockey, but it's I'll say spread too thin or not enough direct cohesiveness. I'll put it that way, right? It's an opportunity where if you took the Team Michigan approach, which is all hands on deck, like so many coaches are pushing their best players to Team Michigan. The coaches that are involved at that level are involved because they give a shit. They care, right? You won't find a group of coaches who care more than the ones involved with Team Michigan. The same could be said with some of your fall organizations too. It's just spread a little bit more thin, not as many resources. It's not 2007. It's not 2012 anymore.
Bam.
Like it can be, you got to be willing to change and adapt with the current climate, I think. And also just accepting of the fact that you have the same intentions as me. We just have different ways of getting there. Let's work together to figure out how both of us can get from point A to point B. And in the process, doing what's best for the kids involved at the end of the day.
And you know what? I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I think in your own words, we're saying the same thing. Because there are guys that are all in on this stuff. And I could mention their names, but I'm not going to embarrass them. You know, people, they have lived this. They have breathed this. It's not just October until whenever their particular season ends. It's what do I need to do to help Team Michigan? What do I need to do to help the other leagues? And to me, I think it starts with getting those guys in the room. There are some that aren't that way, that they're out for their own best interest, or they look at this as something to do in the summer. To me, it's put a circle around those guys that it's in their best interest. They are 100% 100% sincere in the betterment of high school hockey and developing guys. So I think in recent years in Michigan, we've stuck our chest out in a certain regard, and we deserve to. Okay, but now let's show people. Let's show people. Whether it be our finals or epic, like Petey, the last couple of years, the Friday night games at USA Hockey Arena, I'd show that to anybody. I would send those videos, and coincidentally, Brighton was involved in both of them. But I would send those videos to anyone. No, there's not 18,000 people there like there's Minnesota, but it was great hockey. People were losing their minds at those games. And I will respect Rick Gadwa to the day I die, because he had his heart broken in that game 2 years ago. And I saw him in the bowels of USA Hockey Arena. He got a crap-eating grin from ear to ear, and he goes, "How great was that game? You just had your heart broken. Your kids are in it." But those are the type of people that can look beyond, what just happened to me, and look at how does this benefit high school hockey. Mad respect for guys like that.
And there's no less than a dozen, 2 dozen, 50 of those coaches in high school hockey who have great intentions for the game and what's best for everybody. Joe Ford comes to mind. He's a guy I've known for forever who just wants what's best for the game and best for the sport. And I could go on and on coaches, but truly, that's one thing. You get your heart ripped out, and then your first thought is like, man, that was a great game. Like, that was fun to be a part, even if you were on the wrong end of things. And Rick in particular, a lot of coaches. I love to see. I like you. I talk to coaches about players and who should I keep an eye on and things like that. My favorite responses are the coaches who tell me kids on someone else's team.
You got it.
Those are the ones I love the most, because I'm like, I know this is authentic and this is genuine. You were on the bench and somebody else on the other team caught your attention and you made a mental note of that. If you're sitting there and I'm just hearing about your guy and your guy and your guy, it's like, okay, I get it, but those are the ones, and those are the coaches in particular that obviously perk your ears up too when they start talking about other guys.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I hope I know the coaches are watching, because they always watch your content. But to the coaches out there, you want to go up in both of our books. He just said exactly what I think. You know what? My level of respect goes up for you if I hear you talking about some other guy. So I'm gonna tell you another story based on that. We did the KLAA media day last Monday out at Novi High School. And before the thing even starts, I barely get in the door. Petey, 3 unnamed coaches walked up to me and said, "Salem, dude, legit. Like, they took a step next year. They're ready to take." 3 different coaches completely went out of their way to walk up to me and go, "Keep an eye on that team and keep an eye out on a particular player." I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. And so when I told Coach that, he kind of got a smile and he was like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, that's cool, man. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. It makes all of our jobs easier, because at the end of the day, I will say this until I can't say it anymore. I'm not looking to break a story. I'm not looking to, what? I'm looking to help promote something that I really enjoy. Like, I am looking forward, Petey, the group that I hang with. We already have our whole week planned. Okay, we're going to Novi and Bloomfield tomorrow, and then we're going to USA Hockey on Thursday, and then we're going to blow out to Howell on Saturday. It's fun. It helps promote it's my favorite game. I've never hesitated saying that in my entire career, if you want to call it that. And to have something of this caliber in our own backyard, we're pretty blessed, man. And it's made better by coaches like that will seek you out to tell you about not their guy, but the guy playing across the street. I think that's pretty cool, man. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know that you get that in other versions of hockey. I'll put it that way. Not to cast aspersions or anything like that towards the AAA scene, but I don't think that happens anywhere else, right? Where you get a Gadwa, a Mitchell, a Brazil, those guys who are vouching for guys that aren't on their team, that are saying, "Hey, this is someone to pay attention to. Hey, how can we get this guy to the next level? Hey, how can we find a junior team for this guy?" I don't know that I can't swear to it, so maybe I shouldn't speak out of turn, but I don't know that happens in other circles of hockey. I'll put it that way.
No, I didn't see it that much, to
Yeah.
be honest with you. I mean, because, everybody's worried about their own tail, and, at that particular, and that's what I'm going to go down cheese lane here. And I don't care if I'm flat out Gouda. That's what makes this level so cool, because you know what? The dirty secret is these guys aren't doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the money. They're not getting, big contracts and things like that. They're doing it for the love of the game. They're doing it for their community. And, I had some pretty cool conversations in the offseason with the guys from College Hockey Inc. And I think one of the things that Minnesota does so well that I think we're starting to do well here is the sense of community. And unfortunately there they have so many community rinks. I wish we had more community rinks here. That's a story for a different day. But I think that's the coolest thing. Hey, you know what? Where I live, it was great. You know what? When my daughter was going to high school at Northville, I can't tell you how many times I was like, okay, Lauren, I'll see you at the game. And she's like, Dad, you can't talk to me at the game. Okay, honey, I won't talk to you at the game. I know you're with your friends and you want to be cool and everything. But to see the kids go to the school and root on their teammates, and, Northville's another team, Ryan Osmacher continues to build that. And, McCallum's a pretty darn good defender as well. But to me, that's the cool thing about this, Petey. And I hope we keep that grassroots approach going.
All right, well, we're coming on 42 minutes here. I mean, we could talk all night, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to check in with you. We'll do a check-in with you, see where you're at. I can rifle off a couple more topics if you want, but I don't want.
No,
to be
let's,
too
dude, I
greedy
got
here,
nothing
so-
going on. Are you kidding me? I
Yeah.
have no life.
All right. Why don't I throw this one at you here, and feel free to pull the safe word here. But if you could change one thing about Michigan high school hockey, in Sean's perfect world, I guess, what would you do to improve high school hockey?
You know my feelings. I haven't hid this. I've talked to everybody about it, and I love Cody, and Cody and I have had some serious conversations about. I'm talking about Cody Inglis, of course. I think that man's heart is in the right place, but I'm doing a disservice to everybody if I don't say, if Michigan high school football can do such a wondrous job of seeding, why can't we? And I've heard the excuse that everybody comes out with, and Petey, I will never forget this. Coach Rolo, right after they won the championship in 2016, he was in his press conference, and it was funny because here's a guy at the top of the state, and he made a point to, like, he pointed at me and he goes, please keep banging the drum. And I was like, don't worry, I will. And he goes, when I hear people say travel's a difficult problem, you know what my response to that is? Where do you want me to go? Just give me a heads up. Where do you want me to go? How can I do that? And we'll find a way. And you talked to Corey Markham about that. You talked to Micah about that. Of course, the new coach at Houghton. You talk to guys at all corners of the state, and they all say that. So when I hear that brought up, that tells me that maybe you're not listening to the coaches in the state. And I think we all of us, myself included, have to do a better job of listening to the coaches in the state. I think for the most part, they want it. And I think it's something that can be done. Petey, we've seen it 10,000 times, and we'll see it again this year shortly, where there's a matchup early in the playoff where you're going, seriously? Are we really? We're really doing this. The two top 5 teams, or I remember one particular year, there was a 1 versus 2, and it was just, are you kidding me? That shouldn't happen. So if I could do one thing of a litany of things that we could say, that's one. I would like a true tournament. And you know what? Let the cards fall where they may, because I can't tell you how many times we were at the finals and there was a game that shouldn't have happened. And I'm not being disrespectful to people when I say that. There was a game that shouldn't have happened. And I think it should be a true representation of where high school hockey's at. And we have to, get the 4 teams that earned their way there, and not necessarily the 4 best teams, because the routine, any given night, 51 minutes, et cetera, upsets are going to happen. But if an upset happens, that team earned their way there. And in a perfect world, we would do that. I don't know how close we are, but I wish we could do that.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things, travel being one. Like you look at some of these regular season conference games. You got De La Salle that goes down to Trenton for an MIHL game. You got Cap City that goes out to Kalamazoo for a league game. Some of the travel in the Big North, going from Traverse City Central to Alpena, like on a Wednesday night, like,
Mhm.
and it's we could say, oh, it's the sport, and like, oh, the sport itself is accustomed to long travel trips, but it's high school sports in general, or youth sports in general. Travel should not be a hurdle when it comes to the playoff picture. If you're telling a team, hey, you're going to get a way better draw, or a more appropriate draw, but you got to drive 90 miles to go get it, 99 out of 100 coaches, and I'm only saying that because you can't there's no for sure, but
100%. I get it.
almost 100, all of those coaches are going to say, sign me up. Whether you're the number one seed or you're the lowest seed, like whatever you like, you want to be in a position where you're going to get a fair shake. And like you mentioned, some of those I'll call it unfortunate matchups that we've seen in the Final Four for years, for decades. It's not fair to either side, whether it's the higher seeded team that wins a lopsided game, or the lower seeded team that loses a lopsided affair. That's not a great outcome for either side, right? It puts people in jeopardy a little bit, injuries. The game gets out of hand. You don't know what way it's going to go. There's still a lot of things to be concerned about with those types of games outside of the score, and just like, you're in the Final Four, your entire community shows out because, hey, we're in the state semifinals, and then you get your doors blown off. Like, nobody wants that for anybody, right? So I think you're right. There's ways that the playoffs in general could be restructured in a way it's more competitive and more balanced for everyone involved.
The dirty secret is we're still talking about kids. And if a kid's down 7-0 in the biggest game of his life, okay, frustration is going to set in. And being a kid, he might do something chippy. He might do something that goes beyond chippy. And that's the last thing in the world we want to see. And I don't want to see a team come in, and I'm not going to mention any teams, but we know there have been some just ugly games in the past at USA Hockey Arena. Who does that benefit? Honest to God, who does that benefit? I don't get it. Maybe one day down the line, you're a player on one of those teams and you look back 10 years later and you go, that was pretty cool. We made it to the Final Four. We got to USA, but maybe they don't. Maybe they sit back and that's just a brutal memory that I don't know, they got beat 10-1 or 11-1 or whatever the case may be. Nobody that does nobody any good. There's nothing good can come out of that situation.
And for me, like, there's alternatives. There's playoff formats and systems that could be implemented that would largely avoid that, right? And whether it's a tier 1 and a tier 2 playoff system where you're putting more of the top half teams and the bottom half teams, for lack of a better phrase, there's ways you could do it that way, so it is more competitively balanced. Because if you take the top 20% and the bottom 20%, there's a huge difference there, right? So to lump those types of teams in the same playoff format just defies logic at times.
No, I think we've done a better job recently of the haves and have-nots. I think at one point in time it was real. It was real, and in a perfect world, everybody would have it running. But there are differing situations, man. I mean, a small community is a small community. That doesn't mean that you can't have a ton of great players coming out of there. I mean, again, I go back to Hancock. I mean, they won a championship. I go back to Calumet. I mean, you look at all the runs that Houghton has been able to make, but that's where hockey is at a premium. That's where hockey is the first sport. And not every community is like that, man. I mean, let's just be honest. It's sad for them because you and I know it's the greatest sport on earth, but at the end of the day, that's just the sad reality of it.
Can you imagine a playoff format where you got like a Marquette and a Houghton in a state semifinal or state final? Like, I think, I don't mean to speak for them, but like, sign me up, right? If we don't have to beat each other's brains in the regional stage, and there's ways for us to travel and make it work. And then they both end up making a path to Plymouth and then have to go through each other on the game's biggest stage. I think people would be knocking down doors to make that.
I've heard rumors. I don't know it for sure. I don't want to speak out of turn. I've heard rumors that they're thinking about elongating the playoffs sometime in the near future. I'm sure you've heard the same things. And honestly, I don't know for sure. I've heard it. And, that's why we're having conversations like this. And I think it would be even more fun to maybe have a couple weekends at USA Hockey Arena, right? I think it would be an honor for people. I know the logistics of it make it very, very difficult. I mean, chief amongst them, the NTDP might be playing at that point in time, but I think that would be pretty stinking cool if we got into something like that.
All right, I'll flip it on you. Anything you want to talk about? I've been rifling off a lot of topics here. Anything burning on your top of mind there for you want to get to?
You know what? I think everything starts with, let's face it, until further notice, the two top conferences in hockey are the KLAA and the MIHL. And the MIHL is on top. Make no mistake about that. That's the way that it is. But that doesn't mean that we aren't. I think Byron Center's success makes the OK a better place. And I love their playoff idea, Petey. I don't know if you've talked about that yet, but having a conference tournament is just outstanding. I wish everybody would follow that.
Sure.
I think the OK conference doing that. And I look at, I was at the OAA media day the other day. What Clarkston has been able to do is awesome. But I think in turn, what that makes other teams in the conference do is, hey, we better get our shop in order. We're going to get run by these guys, so we better get our shop in order. So I'm intrigued if some other teams start to pop up. But, as always, when you have these conversations, and I can't tell you how many times I've talked to coaches around the state, in a perfect world, we'd be able to talk about everybody, Petey. That's just the way it is. We would be able to talk about everybody. But it's like when you look at rankings, whether it's your rankings, whether it be this ranking or that ranking, you know what you do? You always start at the top. And I think that's what is intriguing about this year. Catholic Central, they haven't lost. I made the joke the other day. They haven't lost since Herbert Hoover was president. Okay. This is going to be a different year for them. Now, anybody with half a brain in their head knows they've been a factory. They're going to get players. That's just what they do. But there are a lot of questions. And that's what makes it intriguing at the beginning of the year. And listen, I remember talking about it last year. They're up front. They could have rolled with 5 lines last year. I mean, they were so gosh darn deep up front. This year, I shrugged my shoulders. I know Catholic Central is going to be good, and I'm going to steal your line. Catholic Central is number 1 until they're not. I love that line. I saw you use that before, and I was like, that's perfect. But that doesn't mean that we aren't asking questions about Catholic Central, and I think some of those questions will be answered tomorrow night against a pretty darn good Stevenson squad.
Yeah, I'm about ready to just put that in the header on my website at this point because I've said it so many times about Catholic Central being top dogs. But all right, I'm going to make a tough question here. Maybe not tough, but does anyone beat them this year? In state, does anybody catch them?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year they aren't state champions again. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think that somebody gets them, and I think if somebody gets them, it might be early in the year. If that happens, I was at that game. Sean Clark and DLS beat them. What is that? 3 years ago now. I mean, it's crazy when you. Yeah, I was at that game, and look, it's going to take a Herculean effort, but. You and I were talking about this. I love what they have on their blue line. I think their blue line is good. I don't know what they have up front. I know some of the pieces. We've seen some of the pieces. I've heard about some of the pieces, but I think I need to see it first. And, the goaltending, they've been blessed. They've had darn good goaltending. I think there's some question marks about their goaltending as well. So if somebody's going to get them, I think it might be earlier in the year. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be Stevenson, but, with their schedule being what it is, what about a team like Rice? What about Rice going in there the night before Thanksgiving? You know how much that game means. I think they lose in state, but I'm going to say it again. It wouldn't shock me in any way, shape, or form if they weren't D1 champions again.
You heard it here first. How about that? uh, no, but to spend some time on CC, I mean, questions in the chat and obviously questions just in general. Where's the offense going to come and who's going to produce after the losses that they had? A guy like Peter Sainin to me really got overshadowed last year because of how talented they were with guys
Yep.
like Jackson Walsh and the Rogowskis and Sebi Ivasil. Like there were a lot of contributors up front. Sainin is one of those guys that's back this year who was 40 plus points on that CC team, playing the toughest schedule in the state, putting up those types of numbers. He's a guy who I think steadies the ship there offensively, I'll say, while some of those new pieces get integrated with Coach Cal's system and just way of life throughout the season, right? I think Sainin can be one of those guys, but there's some guys waiting in the wings as you've said, and got a good look at them obviously this fall, that are going to be major contributors. I think the strength of that team, and you mentioned it, is going to be on the back end. I think they're going to have a really strong 6-7 defensemen that can all play and play at a high level where there's not much separation between number 1 and number 5 on your bench or number 2 and number 6, and it can be kind of interchangeable and really have a lot of pieces at your disposal to work with there on the back end. Almost an embarrassment of riches, so to speak. And I think if you want to be strong somewhere in your lineup, first it's goalie. But if I can't be strong in net, then I want to be strong on defense, right?
Yep. Yep.
I want a bunch of defensemen who can move the puck and play sound defensively. And again, not knowing, maybe some of the question marks as you alluded to in net, and just not knowing what's going to surface as the season unfolds. If I'm strong on the back end, I feel pretty good about myself.
No, I had a chance to talk to Peter the other day, and you can't put a price tag on what he's been through and the guys who he's played with. And this is a young man that plays with confidence, speaks with confidence. So I want to echo what you said there. And Petey, I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The undeniable is when you get involved in a game with Catholic Central, they're just going to grind you out. I've seen it forever now. When you can roll those lines, and I know rolling 4 lines has become a cliche in the game of hockey, and it's sad that it's become the cliche and the punchline it has, because it's an undeniable truth. If I can roll out 4 lines against your 2 and a body, or 2 and 2, eventually something's going to give, and it's not going to be the 4th line. It's just that's the way it is, and we've seen it time and time again. Catholic Central's in a tough battle, and then all of a sudden in the 3rd period, maybe it's a 2-1 game. Boom, it's 3-1. Boom, it's 4-1. Boom, it's 5-1. And you're like, how did we get there? And it comes back to rolling those lines. And you have to give Coach Cal and his staff credit. He's coached those kids up. He has them ready each and every night. It isn't easy. They have a target on them. There is no target in Michigan high school hockey like the target on CC's back. And yet they are there to answer the bell every single night.
And just to echo your statement there, like, you got a lot of mouths. Like a lot of people want to dismiss or discredit or what. Like, oh, well, you have that much talent, it's easy to like. It's not, right. You got to deal with personalities, egos, mouths to feed, people to buy into the system and what you're doing. That's the biggest thing to me is getting that buy-in. It's one thing to have talent and have a lot at your disposal. It's another thing to get guys to buy in and believe and buy into what you're doing as a program. And that's the most impressive thing I think I've seen out of CC over this run with Coach Cal, is the buy-in year after year after year, and egos getting checked at the door, and guys just wanting to win and do what's best for the team, and guys who could be a first liner anywhere else in the state settling into a second, third, fourth line role, and doing it in a way that betters the team essentially. So it really is impressive, and hats off to Coach Cal for that. Like, it's not easy, and anyone on the outside who wants to look in and say it's not, coming from a fellow coach, that type of stuff, it's not easy. The grass is not always greener. We all deal with the same headaches. I want to play more. Why am I on this line with this guy? Like, it doesn't matter if you're the number 1 team or the 131st team in the state. We all deal with the same conversations and the same headaches and the same problems.
It was funny. And by the way, I want to echo what Beachcomber said. Click that thumbs up for Petey. Come on, everybody, just take a second and do that. I remember 2 years ago, not last year was a wagon. I mean, you and I knew that. That was 2 years ago. They didn't have the firepower of CC teams in the past. And you know, I maybe it was 2 years ago, maybe it was 3, I don't know. But they had closer games by CC standards. And I remember I was at one game against USA Hockey Arena. I think it was against Orchard Lake. I don't remember. But I heard a lot of fans say, "What's going on? What's going? We're only winning games 2-1. We're only winning games 3-1." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? You haven't lost in state forever. What? Like, is this really where we're at?" And again, I echo. Forget about what that does to a coaching staff. What that does to the kids. They're kids. I know they don't want to hear it. I know they're kids. These are 16, 17-year-old kids that have to deal with that pressure every single day. Oh my gosh, we can't play a 2-1 game. Like, come on, get real here. You know, I mean, and of course, Catholic Central did is what they're apt to do. They ended up finishing the season and winning the championship by season's end, and they didn't lose in state again. But that's a pressure that is incredible. You know, oh my gosh, you know, what are our fans going to say if we only win? Trenton came into our barn and gave us everything they had, and gasp, we only won 3-2. It's like, really? Is that what we're doing now? So, you know, that's something else that they have to endure. But I mean, they've been the class of it for so long now, and I always say this to Cal. I think the way they've conducted themselves, they've always been classy. They've always given credit to other people and things like that, and that's something that's pretty stinking cool.
Sean, we've talked top teams, we've talked up and coming teams, we've talked wish list for what we want for the sport in season, off season. Thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Is there anything else? Anything else you want to get to before we hang this up?
Let's get all the clans under one roof, man. I mean, for selfish reasons, I want to watch the best of the best play. I want to show the rest of the hockey community how great hockey is in this state, and I think we have the opportunity to do that. So my offer stands. Let's bring the clans together. I'll have a barbecue, and you're invited too, Petey.
Love it. Love it. Can't wait. All right. Well, thank you again so much for your time. Appreciate it very much, Sean. We will say goodbye to our first guest ever on the Petey's Picks podcast. If you enjoyed that, be sure to let me know. Leave a comment here on YouTube if you're watching, Apple and Spotify if you're listening. Be sure to hit that subscribe button as well. Connect with me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You know where to find me. So like that, you like some hockey talk there, I'd be more than happy to have Sean back, or maybe we'll get some other guests involved too from around the state and just talk what we all love. Just talk some hockey. So all right. Well, the top 100 drops tomorrow morning. I will unveil my top 100 names to know returning to Michigan high school hockey. I'll do that live again on YouTube. So much content coming your way. Are you kidding me right now? Insane. So again, like I said, subscribe here on YouTube so you get those notifications and don't miss any of the content I put out. Also, be sure to check out peteyspicks.com for everything I post. All season long, we'll be sending out great content your way.